My goal in this video is to discuss the new emergence of the military in what was once the civil rights movement highly conspicuously, and to explain something of what I have read and know and seen about how this evolved and what its origins might have been and how it might have been there somewhat submerged all along. In an effort to force Seattle to come clean about what they're really doing with the so-called Green Party in order to adjust our language to fit the situation. We not only need to know what is happening, but we need to recognize that the people behind it are experts both in how to present what they're doing and experts in our being deceived and hoodwinked and how we think in that condition. How we think in the condition of being hoodwinked can be very effective in their getting their operations accomplished, using us for what we believe, by what we believe. Now, the processes of the United States of America are fairly straightforward. This has been recognized by black leaders since the age of Frederick Douglass. You have people who recognize that civil litigation and fairness in an atmosphere of good faith is the best way to bring about a harmonious commonwealth. The imposter group has a different idea. They think that you need to zap effectively symbols that reconcile the various feuds that are going on in multiculturalism. It is a foreign invasion. So it's not technically a civil war, but it takes the form of a civil war because they have uploaded a behemoth into the bowels of the United States, representing the crash and burn of our values in operation. And it looks like a feud between the Seattle left and the Trump right, but it's costume play. The Seattle left is the Trump right. So we see this through the sneaky way that Warhol operated. One of the things that we know is that its origins are in a sort of colloquial debate structure that went on a long time between peers in the civil rights movement. Peers who didn't think exactly the same way. Bob Moses and Ella Baker were both skeptical of Martin Luther King's personality cult. They saw it as grandstanding. Well, most people realized that Martin Luther King was throwing himself into the limelight to get across that human beings are valuable and at risk because of the bigots that were running amok in the United States. The murder of JFK, he clearly didn't understand, was in fact a major windfall for the Axis, who came in the back door of Hollywood and launched an attack to vindicate the Vichy French, who were allies of the Japanese in Vietnam. But the maliciousness and mischievousness, you might say, of Hollywood and their gamins like Midori Goto, who plays such a ridiculously vile role in this whole compartment. The New York City Ivy League of Claire de Luz Booth were people who could think clearly and empathize with the people they were targeting. Get in, get to know them, make sure they know what they think, and encourage them to be a certain way. And then behind our backs, they went about saying, well, what if this? What if we do that? What if we, start, upping the ante and making more and more of a food fight? And the Jewish Holocaust survivors went on this, and they, of course, were embattled psychiatrically by the horrible stain of the memory of seeing the march of dolls, their wives, daughters, grandmothers, into the gas chambers. and there was a certain transference that went on. They transferred the guilt of that to us. And just as they transferred now the guilt of their operation to us. For example, when during the 80s they started to percolate with this stuff, the King Crimson crowd came in with this survival level of profitability. And of course, they were adamant that they could antagonize the survival level of profitability with what they called biological intimidation, biological irritability, I believe was how he put it. And Cornel West, ever gibbering, was on about, biological linkage. The sanctity of the human body, thou shalt not be jealous of the living, is a basic scruple of, it probably goes back to the Hammurabi Code. It's a basic scruple of the human race to not inflict problems on other people. And it's the difference between civilized and not civilized. But they're like, what if we give this person the contagion? And anybody who has anything that is unfair to them in their life, they say, well, pick a logo. They're playing Piccolo Go. Pick a logo and zap it, right? How can anybody mistake Larry being zapped with something that gave him a stroke early in life as a friendly act? How can anybody mistake the murder of 3 Kennedys as a friendly act? But they have their fingerprints in the Indian Center and the Asian American community and the Green Party, and they think about equity. And so they were like, well, we want you to help us coordinate the extermination that's necessary in order to bring about equity. There's always been some problem of parity in the United States, reconciling ego poverty with the super rich. I mean, it's not a race issue. There's a lot of poor white people, but they divide and conquer in that way. But there's also attempts through public education to enrich people's lives, even if they are on a low level of profit through knowledge. So you have this thing, and they say, well, parity becomes parody rather than parity. And they create a parody of this, combustible situation where it's no longer a half representing the love of Kennedy and JFK and the People's Movement led by Martin Luther King, but time and a half, a union representing the arc of the swastika. So you have a situation where this kind of grisly dominion by people who want to transfer guilt to people who are innocent to see, how they behave now. If you look at the fact that we're not allowed to photograph people's ballots, and then you talk about Penis Gabriel coming in, an invader from Mars, lying about an implanted neuroplasm and saying, wear your inside out. You get a metaphor for the way they've tried to dominate the United States of America by robo-implant of the consciousness of ugly, disgruntled, mind-shattering, axis hate into people who are poor and want to help each other, right? How do you feel about now, dog eyes? Now we've given you leprosy. This kind of thing is the mentality that's at work. And it's coming out of things like the Jericho Project, the National Association for the Mentally Ill. You have, the sanctity of a poet's license being used for detonator bombs by Tulsi Gabbard's cult. And the concept goes back to, in the publishing house, to Cambodia, the royal way in Cambodia, the war for the world, where conflict is spirited peace, and strange misfit books like The Trial of Dr. Spock. He was said to be put on Dr. King's presidential aspirations and posing with King. What's he on trial for? Conscientious objection. Why Spock? Spock is highly illogical. These conscientious objectors want to have abortion too. They say it's non-violence. That's highly illogical. So you have a situation of subconscious blending in order to create confusion. So, one of the things that the Spirit Foundation of the Axis comes in and says, it's personally, it seems to be no wonder that John Lennon was singing about smiling as he kills, because they uploaded this through that maniacal imposter group of aggressors. And, they had Ringo Starr coming around clucking and having his little chappies clucking that the Beatles were the biggest bastards of all. And you're supposed to admire that. McConnell, Tom McConnell, you had a picture in his room. It's many, many pictures that I drew without consciously seeing it. By accident, thinking it was mine, it went through my subconscious and came out. And he had very dry handshake like Midori Goto did, the driest handshakes I've ever done. I thought of him immediately when I shook her hand. But McConnell, you see, is like McConnell Douglas. He was with David Strang. I even knew him at the governor's school. So I knew McConnell at the governor's school, and he's the one who led me up to the situation at the Kelly school. So they have this impression they want to build subconsciously of white, and get that going in Seattle, which is an easy thing to do. It's already burning, you just blow on it a little and it gets going. So, and they have a mastery of practical idealism. We know what to do, and we know what you would like to see done. So, all of this unfavorable and troubling behavior comes out through a church called that had been around since the medieval days. I mean, Schulman, who was arrested in the Smithsonian, had a book that came out with the AIDS attack about how mayors behave in times of plague. The person from Fox's father, who slipped the book by way of the tiled swastika floor of a friend's meeting, rusted root. His father was some trained medieval scholar, he said. And of course, Nancy Moore denied that. I mean, I don't know what this is, but it certainly rang familiar. So, what we see in the militarization of the civil rights movement is very simply the fascists in Britain. The people who killed Martin Luther King are now saying, we represent the black man. And a lot of people were saying,